The Self-Helpful Podcast is brought to you by Ziglar, your premier source for equipping life and leadership coaches. Visit Ziglar.com and let them inspire your true coaching performance. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining me as I talk with today's most important influencers, guides, and change makers to uncover what truly drives them and extract the big takeaway from their personal journeys and their greatest wisdom. I'm your host, Kevin Miller, and this is Self-Helpful. This is our peak wellness show where we give specific focus to our health and wellness, which is the foundation for all we do. And in this episode, we're talking specifically in regards to glucose. You don't care a whole lot about glucose in and of itself. What you care about is your body's reaction to your food and lifestyle choices and resulting energy levels and your clarity and all that good stuff. And that is the point. Your body reacts to what you eat, how you live, but it's incredibly complex to understand those correlations unless you're wearing maybe a continual glucose monitor, CGM. And this is just new technology. If you are aware of them, it's probably in association with someone who has diabetes, and that's not the case anymore. And you're about to get schooled in that. My expert on the topic and this tech is Collier. Kara is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, a licensed dietitian, nutritionist, and certified nutrition support clinician specializing in glucose control and metabolism. And she's the co-founder and VP of health at Nutrisense. So Nutrisense, that's the CGM we're talking about. It's this is one of America's fastest growing health tech startups. I have been wearing a CGM, a continual glucose monitor from Nutrisense. And I'll tell you, this is not an ad. No money has exchanged between us. Not that I would, be against that, Kara. But my motive here is just helping myself and everyone listening with new opportunities to monitor and understand and increase our health and wellness. As you hear us talk, you can check it out. Nutrisense. It's Nutrisense, Nutrisense.io. All right. There's my intro, Kara.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Give it some justice there. As I said, man, I'm not a clinician here. I am aware of continual glucose monitors, diabetics wearing that. But then I had been reading about, okay, this is what people are doing now from an athletic standpoint, which is my arena. It was for performance, but now you guys are working to get it going beyond that. I'm a fan of wearable devices overall. And this is latest tech. So explain that, because you guys talk about it. It's right on the front of the website. This is your focus is really on non-diabetics, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so tell us, give us the impetus of why, as a non-diabetic, people want this.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to go back, as you mentioned, the CGMs, they're typically used historically for diabetics. So a medical device that you're working with your endocrinologist, adjust your insulin dosing, very clinical medical setting. And as a registered dietitian earlier in my career, that is the use case of which I worked with patients, type 1 diabetics specifically. And as I kind of exited clinical healthcare space, for, many reasons, healthcare is very complicated and doesn't always work quite as well as we want it to. I started to think about how to solve some of the core problems I was seeing in the hospitals. You see people come into the ICUs with complications of lifestyle related chronic conditions. Yeah. So when thinking about how to address some of those root causes, what is really tied to a lot of that is metabolic health at the center. Yeah. So I think about metabolic health as sort of like our cellular engine that drives our bodies to be able to perform and behave in an optimal or not so optimal way.
Look, is it fair, just on your story right there, that you were in healthcare, which, no bones about it, healthcare is about fixing the problem that is already manifested. You are now broken. And what I'm going to paraphrase, you tell me if I'm right, is that you went from that to saying, how can we use some of this stuff and actually prevent this stuff from happening and help people before they break? Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I spent about 3.5, 4 years at the beginning of my career working in hospitals, mostly ICUs. So started in healthcare traditional setting and then realized that, just like you said, it's more sick care, it's reactive, it's for acute issues. But these chronic illnesses, chronic diseases take decades to develop. Yeah. So if we can intervene earlier with the right information and then actually in a way that's motivating to people to really truly change their behaviors, then that's where we can actually move the dial. And I realized that was going to be pretty impossible to do within the existing system. So that's when eventually came to founding Nutrisense to solve that problem. So it's how do we get the right information to people way, way earlier so that they can focus more preventatively and actually kind of address some of these issues before we've, gotten to the point that we're really truly have destruction within our body. We completely decompensating to where we have now crossed the threshold into disease, which it's still valuable and important at that stage. But ideally, we're getting that information way sooner.
Totally. Well, so let me ask you. So obviously, if you got diabetes, you've got, whether type 1, type 2, and you're over, type 1. Type 2, we know we can do a lot to help with. But let's even go back further than that. Right now, we have, I think the last stat I saw was 37 million Americans or something I think that they're saying have diabetes. Now, that doesn't say how many of them have pre-diabetes. Maybe you know that number. I didn't look.
So the 37 million, so about, I think it's like 12% of the population have type 2, when it's more about 38, probably closer to 40% of the population have pre-diabetes or diabetes.
So that's there. So we're looking at prevention of not getting diabetes. And I would say even not getting pre-diabetes, staying away from that. I do want to, and I want to come back there. I do want to selfishly, I've been watching or working on myself for so long and feel like I'm doing pretty well. Like I'm not at risk I don't need to make a lot of effort to prevent pre-diabetes. I shouldn't be even close there. And yet I'm still over here on the side of caring about my personal performance, whether that's in an athletic endeavor or it's just sitting here and I want to be creative to write my next book. I want to be creative to write a great show. I want critical thinking skills. I do not want brain fog. I do not want to sit down here and feel like, oh my gosh, man, I'm not all here. So even just on that side, you're saying, okay, this is, because that's what's new to me here with the CGM.
Yeah.
I've been doing, I wear a Garmin watch, and it's not super clinical like an Oura Ring or whatever, but it does give me the stats and I can see what my body battery looks like from, the day before or the night's sleep, what my sleep patterns are and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. And I love that, but that does not show me, CGM, what's happening especially in relation to my diet, but as you guys say, it's diet and lifestyle, because I saw when I was wearing it, I had some big spikes, like especially when I go out and do a big workout, and it's not about food, it's about what I'm doing. And I'd see huge shifts in it. So again, just back to a daily, even if I'm not worried about pre-diabetes, there's a lot to be gained from just knowing where I'm at and monitoring that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about why should anybody care about their metabolic health, and not just diabetics, we can think about the long-term view. So disease prevention. And again, it's not just diabetes that we know glucose levels are correlated with. It's also cardiovascular disease. It's also, dementia and neurological conditions, chronic kidney disease. All of these most common conditions are tied to glucose and metabolic health, and then also our immune system function, hormone balances, general longevity. But then we can also look at that short-term view. Our glucose levels are also our direct reflection of our energy levels. So It's how your energy feels throughout the day. And it also directly affects our day-to-day brain function, as you mentioned. So mental clarity, cognitive function, concentration, memory, and then also mental health. So a lot of people with those, if you have big swings in your glucose values, which you can certainly have without having diabetes, a lot of that triggers anxiety for people. So kind of that mental health clarity. And then things like cravings, hunger, ability to kind of just have a good overall quality of life, improve sleep quality. All these things can also be tied to glucose values, because it's really our body's, primary energy source. So if that's out of balance, then you're going to see that ripple effect both in your day to day and then those long-term consequences as well.
So, gosh, you just rattled off a whole bunch of different pathologies. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I know what I'm eating. I don't feel like I'm super at risk on a diabetic standpoint, but you just rattled off. And now I'm sitting here wondering, okay, what could I be at high risk of metabolically that I'm not taking care of aside from diabetes? List those again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just diabetes, as I mentioned. That's the first thing that most people think
Yeah.
of course. But we also know, so if you think about what is called metabolic syndrome, this is essentially a criteria where if any metrics of metabolic health, which includes glucose, but also kind of your waist to hip ratio, so where your body composition looks, your HDL and your triglycerides and your blood pressure, those metrics together kind of give an overall viewpoint of what your metabolic engine looks like. And any deviation in those, and we see a significant increase for not just diabetes, but cardiovascular disease. So that includes anything like heart attacks, stroke, hypertension, or high blood pressure. And then we see an increased risk, significant increased risk for neurological conditions. Most commonly, you think of dementia or Alzheimer's. And then we also see a really significant increase for any sort of kidney impairment. So chronic kidney conditions, chronic kidney disease. And in addition to that, we also know that the one metric that is most, out of all the lab values, that is most highly correlated with longevity in general. So general, life expectancy is your average glucose levels. So overall, this is really impacting your body's ability to just kind of, continue in its optimal function for as long as possible.
Okay, that's interesting. I've coming from an athletic, arena. I do know of, people and they're performing well and whatnot, and then they'll find out that their cholesterol is really high, and you think, gosh, that doesn't seem like it would make sense. Or you hear the stuff every once in a while, somebody had a heart attack, some famous runner or whatever it is and has a heart attack. And then on a dementia side, I am going to hope that the health and wellness athletic pursuit is going to help with that. But plenty of older athletes that get dementia just at the same, standpoint as other people. I wonder if you're really overdoing it, overtaxing it, maybe if you're even at risk of doing that earlier. So these are things you're saying are all aspects of your metabolic health.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is this paradox with performance that we see where, and we can, talk about, of course, what all affects your glucose levels. But as you alluded to a little bit ago, it's not just nutrition. It's also your fitness level, your exercise habits. So for the most part, we see this U curve where increasing exercise and increasing your level of fitness and physical performance improves aspects of health, especially glucose levels. But then sometimes when you get into that hyper competitive, professional athletes, performance goals can sometimes be at odds with health. And you may have experienced this, but sometimes what we need to do to perform at the very, very, very best level isn't always what is best for our health overall. So sometimes there gets to be a little bit of a trade-off there at that high levels of performance. If you think about, you're putting a lot of stress on your body sometimes in those really high performance, which is why a lot of athletes also have higher injury risk. But then you're also, especially endurance athletes, we see a lot of people who have done just years and years of goos and, Gatorade and whatever quick, refined sugar they need to keep those energy levels up. And then maybe they aren't performing as much. And then they're still seeing those glucose levels kind of rise back up after years of really, pounding the system with lots and lots of easily available energy. So there's a little bit of a paradox there.
No, totally. And I come from that world. Matter of fact, I was just watching the Tour of Spain, the Vuelta, which is happening right now. So from cycling, it's like the Tour de France, it's over in Spain, and we've got an American who's leading it right now. So I'm actually watching the thing. And yeah, to do the miles that they do 21 days in a row, that's completely stupid. We even know better than that on running. We don't have no event where you're doing a marathon, not an actual official event, a marathon a day for 21 days. It's dumb. That's what they do in cycling. And yeah, those guys are killing themselves. And I don't think I went to that quite extent, but okay. So on that though, we're looking again, for me, I want to be performing well out on, at an event. But bigger than that, I want to sit here and just have my energy levels. I don't want to crash after lunch. I don't want to crash midday. I don't want brain fog. And we've all had that. You have the cycles in life and something happened and you got a kid in the ER overnight or whatever. The next day you're compromised or you're at a family event or whatever it is, and you're eating whatever's going on and you suffer from that, in a cycle or in a moment, that's okay. But overall, and that's what we're seeing, people are long-term doing these things. And then at some point for most people, it is going to manifest somewhere else. And like you said, we've got, again, whatever the percentage is. If you take diabetes and pre-diabetes, do you know the stat? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like half the population now.
Yeah, it's about 40%, but that's the most recent stat, which they take, like several years to update those. So I would imagine it's closer to 50% at this point.
So here we are, and I'm going to pick on America. I know people are listening to this who are not in America, but I'm going to pick on America, that we are eating ourselves into diabetes. And yeah, we want to think that we just eat whatever, your body does what it does to process it. And our body's awesome at survival. It's amazing. But at some point it's going to manifest. We all hear about sugar. I hope nobody's, especially listening to this show. I mean, we have a curated demographic of people who would even listen to a show like this. But even here, with the average person knowing, too much sugar is not good. Give us some insight that that even amongst an aspiring, health-oriented crowd, where we are missing it. We think we're doing okay, but you're going to come along and go, yeah, you're like everybody else and you're missing it in what areas specifically? Let's go dietary first.
Yeah. So starting with diet, which is the first place, really to start, but it's certainly not the only area. We all know that sugar, is not ideal. But I think there is a mismatch between what people think is everything in moderation or balance versus maybe what's actually optimal for their bodies.
Yeah.
And this is where there's a lot of variability. The interesting thing about these monitors is you can put them on 100 people who are all non-diabetic, not in the pre-diabetic range, and you're going to see completely wildly different glucose values on the CGM. What we can capture from those traditional lab markers that you might normally be looking at, the two being your fasted glucose and your hemoglobin A1C, which is like your average glucose, they're only catching, a little snapshot of what's happening. It's telling you what happened in that fasted state on that particular day, and then your average glucose levels over the last 3 months. And then what we tend to see is people's responses to foods can be all over the place. So one thing to keep in mind is how much variability there is between people. And you can't know that information unless you see the data. So one individual who is maybe the same age, same gender, same body composition as another person might have double the response to bananas as that other person, and then half the response to potatoes as that other person. So even like whole food carbohydrate sources, we have these very different responses. Research is seeming to believe that this is due to our different microbiome makeups, different genetic tendencies, lifestyle, epigenetic factors, but we have these really, really unique responses to food. So that's something to keep in mind, is just that.
Can I highlight that?
Yeah.
I told you, so these folks listen to the show here. They know Dr. Randy James, my buddy, who was just in here talking about his experience with his own CGM. So he could theoretically be standing there. Both of us we're similar age, similar lifestyles, whatever. He could eat an apple and doesn't phase him a whole lot. And so I think, oh gosh, so an apple's okay. And of course, what we don't know is I eat it and it just spikes to oblivion, just like you said, based on whatever. And at this point, we don't need to go down that road. It just is. So I'm there. I've got to be the only way I could know that. And again, this isn't just a sales pitch for CGMs, but it is saying what the opportunity is. The only way, no different than sleep. We don't really know. We might think we got a good night's sleep. Whatever. We don't know until we wear an Oura ring or whatever it is and find out, oh, that's what's really happening. So here, that's what the CGM technology offers, is to see that, hey, it's not a black and white, eat this, eat that, this is good, this is bad necessarily. It depends on you. The only way to know is here. And you can know and see, oh my gosh, yeah, I thought for so long that this was a healthy product and it's jacking my, what would be that? What would be a common thing that most people would tend to think might be okay? And you're saying, gosh, for a lot of people have an issue with X and spiking their glucose that they wouldn't have normally thought.
Yeah. So there's the variability that's just, unpredictable between people. But then there are a lot of things that I think surprise people, which are usually like dubbed like healthy, low carb alternatives that sometimes have these like fake fibers or fake ingredients that usually still result in a glucose spike. So examples might be some of the sugar gummies that are like low carb sugar gummies or low carb chocolates. A lot of those actually spike people's glucose values just as high as the alternatives. So that's something to keep in mind is some of these like packaged foods that are a little bit of a marketing game, just proceed with caution, try to veer towards whole foods as much as possible. And then the other thing is the level of processing. So just using, let's say, oats as an example, you will see a significant change in your glucose response depending on if you ate instant oats versus rolled oats versus steel cut oats. Me personally, I've tried all three of those. Steel cut oats, my glucose moves maybe 10 to 20 points. We're jumping all the way to the instant oat example, which is the most processed form of oats. It's about like 80 to 90 points that my glucose will change. And so when we say, try oatmeal or eat oatmeal for breakfast, those two foods really aren't even the same thing anymore. Instant oats versus steel cut oats. I wouldn't even consider them, the same ingredient. So really thinking about the level of processing, and you can even see this, of course, an obvious example too might be like a whole fruit versus like juicing that fruit.
Right.
So thinking about like how much it's been processed. And another nutrition tip that we see works for almost everybody is making sure to have what we call no naked carbs. So eating carbohydrates by themselves, especially on an empty stomach. So if it's like first thing in the morning, you're going to see a much more dramatic glucose response than if you had some protein first and then the carbohydrates. This kind of helps to slow down digestion, blunt some of that glucose response. And it also leads usually to people feeling a little bit more satiated, which then tends to lead to less overeating and kind of like, snacking, going back for more food. So really always pairing those carbohydrates with some protein as well is an easy way to kind of see some improvements.
Well, I want to clarify that because I saw I guess it was on Instagram, and you talked about specifically that, and it wasn't even the pairing. You didn't even say have carbohydrates. If you're going to in the morning per se with a protein, you said, and actually eat the protein first, like sequentially eat that first. So if you're going to have, if I got this right, you'd say, okay, Kevin, so you're best off not to get up in the morning and just have a bowl of fruit or an apple or whatever. Yeah. Don't do that. Now, but you're not saying don't have fruit. If you want to, just have, an egg first and then eat that. And even that sequence will help.
Yep, absolutely. And it works for pretty much everybody. So it's one of those things that's just kind of like a consistent truth across the board with the data.
And so when you say naked carbs, so you would say the same thing if I'm going to have just to take the old standby steak and potato dinner or whatever, literally start off and eat some of that steak. Let it go in, let it go down, then go over and have your potato.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would never know this. That's why you're on the show. All right. So, I want to ask then, even because you talk about whole foods. So hopefully people heard that was a real quick blip there on processed foods. I'm really hoping that most people in the audience know if it's processed, if it's in the middle of the grocery aisle and it has a shelf life, it's processed. It's not a whole food. Your good foods are out on the edges of the grocery, your whole foods. But even there, I want to know about, because if I hear that and go, oh, whole foods, well, what's out there on the edge? Well, potatoes. I guess rice is still on the inside. Well, but I want to know about that. Potatoes, rice, whole grain bread. Tell me about those three.
Yeah. So it really depends on your carbohydrate tolerance. So when thinking about whether I'm going to be able to tolerate like a whole potato with my steak, or whether I need half a potato, or whether I really shouldn't eat any potatoes at all, it's going to depend on a few different factors. One is kind of the state of your health at baseline. So as we mentioned, maybe 50% of the population has prediabetes or diabetes. It's also estimated that close to 90% of the population would not be considered metabolically optimal. So those 5 criteria we talked about earlier, about 90% of the population has at least one of those in an abnormal range. So most people in America are in a state of sort of insulin resistance. And the more that you are potentially insulin resistant, the less your body is going to be able to tolerate some of those carbohydrates. So you really kind of have to think about the state of your health and then also your kind of overall activity level. So somebody who is, an endurance athlete and they're running, even if it's just more like recreational, let's say you're running a couple miles every day compared to somebody who's completely sedentary, that person who is active has more room to be able to eat some of those kind of quicker energy sources, which is what I would consider some of those easier to digest carbohydrates like white rice or white potatoes. So you really have to kind of consider your lifestyle and your health status. But they can work for a lot of people. I'm certainly not in the camp that everybody needs to be keto or low carbohydrate. You really need to adjust to what your body needs at that moment. But for a lot of people, those foods can work perfectly fine, especially if it's a whole potato that you've roasted and you're eating some protein first with it, and you're doing kind of a portion size that's working for your body. It can be completely okay.
Is there anything like that? Even, well, I'll say for myself, potatoes, I don't generally do. They're nightshades. So along with, peppers and eggplant and what's the other one? There's another main. Tomatoes. Thank you. My body does not like those much. So I don't do those. Now I will do sweet potatoes, which is the goofiest thing that it's a different animal, but it actually is. And my body does a lot better with that. Is that a relevant substitute a lot that's going to do from a glucose standpoint that does tend to serve the body better?
Yeah. So with the nightshades and then also, different categories of food, sometimes dairy, especially gluten for many people, these can be inflammatory for some subset of the population. So it's just very important to know that about you. And if you personally are somebody who, maybe you experience inflammation from gluten, when you eat it, then you're probably going to have an even more pronounced effect in your glucose values when you eat that, because not only are you having it break down into glucose right away and have your values skyrocket, but you're also having that inflammatory response, which can then also drive up glucose levels. Whereas somebody who maybe tolerates it perfectly fine might not see as dramatic of a glucose response. So kind of as an example related to this, we had a customer, example that was having a glucose response to macadamia nuts, which is a very glucose friendly nut. It's like the keto nut. And then after he did some food sensitivity testing, it was macadamia nuts were like his greatest intolerance. So he was kind of having this inflammatory response to the food. So you can sometimes see that show up as well.
That's so funny because I did a sensitivities test. It's probably been a couple of years now. And one of the top ones, like eggs was up there. Okay, that makes sense. We got a lot of people who have issues to eggs. And, nightshades, I struggle with a lot of the corn, not even corn, but corn derivatives, the xanthan gum and the, maltodextrin, I think is often corn bother me even more. But then way high up on the list is green beans. I thought I just was just ignorant. I thought, who the heck is intolerant to green beans, man? These come out of the garden. What's wrong with that? But legumes in general, which if you're trying to do, I in the past been vegan and then vegetarian, and man, and legumes, that's a mainstay. Yeah. My body, for whatever reason, it likes to get inflamed when I have those. So, you do this. I want everybody to look on, if you go to Instagram and it's at Nutrisenseio, I believe is your guys' Instagram. And there's a lot, I was looking at it today. There's a lot of people on there going, hey, let's see what happens. They're wearing the CGM, the monitor. Well, let's see what happens when I eat a Chipotle burrito. Let's see what happens when I eat X. And that's the point of going along and doing this. Now, I didn't care. So I'm wearing the thing and I just wore it. I didn't pay attention to anything. I just thought, let me just live my life and see what happens. And now, of course, you got to track your food well in doing that. The other thing, and we don't have to leave food and go into lifestyle right now, but I was real aware of how high I spiked during my exercises. And I want to tell you, and so you can add in how this makes sense. I habitually a lot of times I don't eat breakfast. I've gone through a long time of, the intermittent fasting and whatnot. I'm generally not hungry in the morning. And so I just wouldn't. And if I'm going to go out, especially if I'm going to run, even more so than ride, or if I'm just going to do a really hard effort, I just won't eat that much. And I've gotten myself to a place where I can do that. My body doesn't need it for the performance. And yet when I go out there, I'm seeing that, man, my glucose spikes through the roof. So what's happening?
Yeah. And so it's important always to differentiate that glucose response that you might be having with exercise versus maybe food. So with exercise, we might see one of two glucose responses depending on the intensity of the exercise. So the more intense it is, the more likely we are going to see a glucose rise during that exercise. And you really can think about this as like supply and demand of energy. So if we're doing something intense, so maybe you're going on a hard ride, maybe you're doing sprints, maybe you're trying to PR at the gym, weightlifting, then your body needs more energy in that moment than probably what is available just like in circulation. So typically what happens is, your hormones send out different signals to release glucose from different stored energy sources, or the liver can create more glucose to supply that energy need. And so typically this response is very normal and healthy, especially if it's paired with what we would expect the exertion level to be for that exercise. Sometimes if somebody is not very fit and maybe they're getting into exercise for the first time, even kind of a mild, fast-paced walk might bring their glucose up because their body's not really used to that.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't expect that, kind of for the average person. So it is normal for glucose to rise during that, and the body is using that energy right away for fuel. So it goes through different mechanisms than something if you ate a bag of Skittles and some Gatorade and sat on the couch and had a similar glucose rise. Mm-hmm. Your body is going through a completely different process in that situation. So as long as it's, 140 is what we're looking for food spikes for a non-diabetic as kind of that upper threshold. But 180 is what we really want to stay under when we're doing kind of that intense exercise. Because above 180, we start to kind of see a lot of inflammation, oxidative stress, damage to that actual blood vessel. And typically we don't see that unless somebody is really overdoing it. We'll see it with like CrossFit, competitions, typically, something like that. And usually we can mitigate that by eating a little bit more beforehand, really focusing on hydration and, a couple other strategies.
Okay. So now let's come off of the intense exercise athletic aspect and just say the average person in average, like even the average, somewhat health-minded person is going along. And so we talked about some of the culprits with diet. What about with lifestyle? They're not going out doing some massive, intense, exercise, but give us the lifestyle risks for this.
Yeah. So when it comes to lifestyle, there's really three categories that are going to be the most impactful on your glucose levels. The first is going to be your fitness level, your physical activity habits. The second is going to be your sleep, so quality and quantity. And then the third is going to be stress, both psychological stressors, but also physical stressors. So when it comes to exercise, this might be one of the most powerful tools we have in our toolbox to have good metabolic health and good glucose control. And everyone wants to know what exercise is best. The cheesy answer, but the true answer is whatever one you can do consistently. So if somebody absolutely hates to do a certain type of exercise and you're trying to get them to do that, and then they just don't stick to it, then that is not the best exercise for them. So consistency is really what wins here. There is a lot of interesting research that even skipping, a few days of exercise. So I think there was a recent study that came out where the group of participants took 1 week off after already being, regular exercisers. And they had a statistically significant decrease in their insulin sensitivity, which then led to a statistically significant increase in glucose values just in their day-to-day. So consistency is really what we're going for. But both aerobic exercise and strength training are going to be really beneficial. Our skeletal muscle are actually our largest sink for glucose. So 80% of glucose that is circulating in our body will end up getting picked up by our skeletal muscle. And if there's no room in there or it's already all full of stored glucose, then it's probably going to get turned into fat instead. So the more muscle mass we have is almost like an insurance policy for our glucose values. But then that aerobic exercise also really helps increase our mitochondrial function, which is processing some of this glucose values, using some of that energy. So both are very, very beneficial, but we want to be consistent. And then we also don't want to be that person that works out for an hour a day and then is completely sedentary the remaining 23 hours of the day. So most important things are to also move throughout the day and to try to be consistent as possible.
Okay, I want to speak to a couple of things that you said there. That's one that I got hit with, I don't know, a couple of years ago. Maybe it's been longer than that, kind of with the, the stand-up desk fad that kind of went, I say fad. I mean, I have them, I use them some, but it was kind of like sitting is the new smoking. It's really hurting us. And I was thinking, I think it was along that time when somebody pointed out, so Kevin, it's great that you go out and do your hour or more a day, whatever, big workout in the morning. But just as you said, if you are sedentary the rest of the day, you are suffering still from that aspect. And it changed my perspective. And so now it is trying to get up, trying to get, moving. And people, we talk about that. You park somewhere, park further out or take the stairs or do whatever. For me, though, I don't even do that. I don't have to leave whether I'm in my home office or here. And so it's, gosh, maybe every time I go to the bathroom, get a drink, whatever, drop down and do some push-ups, do some pull-ups, do some dips, do some whatever. And it really did. It changed my perspective because I thought, if I get that big chunk done, I'm good for the rest of the day. And I saw that in your literature, your Instagram or something like that, the benefit of trying to do a little bit. Would you go so far even to say better to do a little bit throughout the day than to even do the one big chunk if you got to take one or the other?
Yeah, I would. And there's research to back that up as well, which is quite interesting. You can take the same amount of exercise and participants broke it up throughout the day in 5 to 10 minute increments versus like an hour workout. And the spacing throughout the day was more beneficial overall for multiple metrics of health. Really interesting.
Let me ask you then also, you mentioned skeletal muscle and protein. I'm not sure exactly. So folks listening, when this is going to drop, when this show will drop in relation to, we've got a series coming up with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. So she has a new book coming out. I don't know if it has yet, called Forever Strong. And her big focus is muscle and the benefits to longevity. And of course, then how do you feed that muscle? Protein. I think it was on your Instagram, one of your posts, Kara, and it was also the recommendation of a gram of protein per pound of body weight that you have, or I think Gabrielle said, and maybe you did too, or your target body weight. Obviously, if you're 500 pounds and you should be, 190, then it'd be 190 grams, not the actual weight that you are. But whatever that target healthy weight is, a gram of protein, which, as you know, there's so few people, me included, at this point. I just talked to Gabrielle last week. So I'm on a new path of going, holy smokes, how do I get that much protein in? Because I'm not even close.
Yeah, I love her work and we work with her as well. And it's a huge point of emphasis for our clients and customers also. Vast majority of people we work with are under eating protein and they don't realize it. So especially women, of what I have found, tend to just misjudge how much protein is in a source. So we often see a lot of people for breakfast that eat one egg, which is 7 grams of protein. That's not making a very big dent if your goal is, 160 grams in the day or 130 grams in the day. And let's say at lunch, you include half a cup of beans, which might be useful, but it is still not enough to get you there. That's probably only about 10 grams of protein. So really when you start to track it, so trying to get people to truly track everything they're eating for at least a week, you don't have to track forever. I know tracking is cumbersome, but it can help bring awareness to probably some habits and, quantities and things that you aren't realizing. And what we see is that when people increase their protein, not only are they more likely to be able to build muscle mass and keep it on, but again, we see that people are satiated for longer. So they tend to eat less. So they tend to have the weight loss that they're looking for and the body composition changes that they're looking for. And they have more even and stable glucose levels. So it tends to be something that is really just beneficial for all aspects of health and very little, downside, except for the fact that you might have to change the way that you think about your meals.
When you talk about in this aspect of metabolic health, would you looking at exercise, you just mentioned obviously cardio stuff or, resistance training, building muscle. If you had to err on one side, which would it be?
I am always a huge proponent of resistance training, building skeletal muscle, especially, I work with a lot of women, and I think, again, it's really underemphasized for women. I think women are afraid to go do weight training. They're afraid to do resistance training. And so I'm really trying to break that barrier. There are a lot of great resources out there for people to kind of just like follow along a workout in an app, follow along something, get a personal trainer. But I think having a strong base of that lean body mass is going to protect you in so many instances down the road, but also immediately. But we know, it's one of the most predictive aspects of longevity and health span is having that good amount of lean body mass. I also see that the women who have the least issues during menopause and with hormonal changes are the women who have the most skeletal muscle and have been doing resistance training. That's purely anecdotal, but it seems to be a very strong trend. So I think resistance training is really important to not be missing.
Okay, I went down because that's my propensity to go down the fitness and the diet and stuff. I do want to come back to what you said. You listed out 3 things: fitness level, sleep quality, and stress. So when you're looking at metabolic health, when you're looking, again, if you've got if you're wearing a CGM, so it's monitoring you, tell us in relation to sleep, what you're seeing. So these, whether it's bad sleep habits or just having poor sleep because of XYZ is affecting it. We're going to see, what are we going to see? Spikes, dips, what's going to happen?
Yeah. So if you have, and actually sleep and glucose have a bidirectional relationship. So if you are having higher glucose values going into that night of sleep, it's going to affect your ability to have high quality sleep and impair your ability to get into those deep sleep stages specifically. And then also if you have a poor night of sleep, it's going to affect your glucose levels the next day. So typically what we see in that case, and this can be both poor quality. So maybe you are in bed for 9 hours, but you're kind of tossing and turning, or you're not getting in a lot of, deep sleep, all of those different stages, or just not enough sleep. Both of those, we're going to see glucose levels rise the next day. So typically those morning fasted glucose levels will be higher. And then your responses to meals will also be higher. So this is really interesting. I've seen this in my data. I've seen it in many people's data, is that let's say you have your go-to breakfast meal or whatever your first meal of the day is. And normally you respond very well to it, but you had a poor night of sleep last night, whatever happened, something interrupted your ability to get that restful sleep. And you have close to 2 times the amount of the glucose response to that same exact meal the next day. And so what research shows actually is that glucose levels could be up to 40% higher and hit kind of those insulin resistant values when we get poor night of sleep. So what's really important to know is if you are chronically not sleeping well, this could literally be the one and only habit that actually puts you into prediabetes, diabetes. Your diet could be great, everything else could be great. You could be an athlete, but if you're not looking at sleep and paying attention to sleep, that alone can kind of drive you in that direction.
Okay, well, sleep is something that I've been more educated on that side than the glucose side. And yeah, for me, stress, and it could be relationship stress, you're in arguments with your spouse or kids, or whatever, that take you in and give you poor sleep because your mind is stuck on that worry, that anxiety, whatever. Now, I do see the most acute changes for me with food. And yeah, if I could have my pick every night, I would have a couple glasses of wine and a big bowl of ice cream, and it destroys my sleep. Popcorn destroys my sleep. Just literally wrecks it. I might as well not even go to sleep with us. It's kind of gotten worse as I've gotten older. So if I want good sleep, want good recovery, I know what to do, and I know what's going to happen if I decide to imbibe, and it wrecks my sleep. And yeah, it's like this vicious cycle that you get up and you're all, like you're saying, you're already in trouble, and it's just going to build upon itself, and it calls us back into, and that is a big part, not a big part. It's a gigantic part of just the accountability of a wearable device. You know what? I'm going to hold on to that just for a second. Maybe we'll end on that, the accountability benefit of it. I do want to we talked about sleep quality. So now talk about stress just in and of itself. So somebody's out there, they're eating clean. They think let's say they are sleeping well, but stress, you mentioned earlier, just anxiety in general, how that is affecting our literal glucose levels and then of course, thereof energy.
Yeah. For many of our healthy customers, many of, people who don't have diabetes, they're eating well, exercising, stress is where they see their highest glucose responses. So we can see this both in acutely stressful moments and then also the effect of chronic stress. So acute stress, think you're in a traffic jam and you're getting really mad, or you're in an argument with someone, or you got a stressful email that kind of sends your adrenaline rushing. That surge of adrenaline and cortisol literally releases a flood of glucose in our body. And so this is a, evolutionary response where typically when we are in an acutely stressful moment, we need energy. And so our body kind of releases its stores. The liver is starting to create glucose as much as possible. But typically in those acutely stressful moments, we should see that glucose spike and we should see it come back down. And so with those, of course, if you're having this 2 or 3 times a day, we certainly want to implement some stress management techniques in order to kind of alleviate some of that acutely stressful response. But where we really see people get into trouble is with the chronic stress. So instead of maybe a sharp glucose spike as you have that surge of hormones, you're seeing kind of a chronic low hum of glucose rising. So we'll see this especially when you're in a fasted state. So while you're sleeping early in the morning before you've eaten anything, many people who are under a lot of chronic stress will have glucose levels that are, in the 90s, 100s, 110s, which would be considered pretty high in that fasted state. And a lot of this is because we're kind of overstimulating cortisol at baseline. So it's that same response as that acutely stressful moment, but it's just kind of happening at a lower level, but constantly. And that can really add up, of course. If our glucose levels are never really coming fully down, if we're always kind of stimulating that stress response, then, eventually it's really going to wear down on the system. We can also see this with physical stressors. So things like illness or injury or anything that's kind of putting a physical stress on the body, we see a similar response.
Okay. Well, again, talking about overlapping shows, because to some degree we're talking about, because my first thought was, okay, we should meditate. We should do some of these things to help ourselves. That's great. But ultimately the question is, what is causing us that stress, that long-term, that abiding anxiety, which comes really into our own emotional intelligence. We did a series not long ago. And again, I'm not exactly sure when this is going to drop. We've got another series coming up on emotional power with a Harvard psychiatrist. And it's understanding why. That's what I've had to do, Gary, is wonder, why things aren't bad. I'm not in a war zone. My life is pretty good, but I run on anxiety, even just excited about things that are fun, but I kind of keep this level and I don't come down, and I'm not considering the long-term effects. And you're saying, yeah, this is another thing that the glucose that can harm my metabolic health, that the glucose monitor can help me have. I paid attention, like on your guys' Instagram account, people doing, hey, here's what happens when I eat a Chipotle burrito or whatever. Mm-hmm. This is what happens when I eat an apple. This is what happens there. So what I hear you saying is, hey, this is what happens when I have poor sleep. Let's check it out. This is what happens when I am letting my anxiety go awry because of this relational strife, or I'm worried about money, or whatever it may be. I'm scared of my neighbor, whatever it is. That you can watch it and monitor it and understand what's happening and know that is going to, at the end of the day, we're saying if you are out of balance, it's going to manifest somewhere, whether it's critical thinking skills or just hope and joy in life, or diabetes or heart disease. It's not benign. Something's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to surface somewhere, and most likely multiple places if you keep going long enough. And what is interesting, and maybe tying to that kind of accountability piece, that first is awareness. Sometimes your baseline levels of stress are so high and your anxiety is kind of so high that it feels normal. Normal is normal. And for many people, they don't realize that this is actually a problem.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to recognize than something like I slept like crap last night. If you really slept super poorly, you usually know. Or if you're not exercising at all, you know. If you're overweight, you know. But for many people, it's easy to deny or ignore maybe some of these stress responses. And so seeing the data first helps bring awareness to that, especially those kind of acutely stressful glucose spikes. Many people are like, whoa, I had no idea that my body was having such a response in these moments. So first, it's really about building that awareness, becoming motivated that this might actually be something that's really affecting me. And then the data helps you kind of adjust things. Like you said, for some people, meditation is the thing that does it. For some people, meditation, they hate it. They're never going to stick to it. It's not for them, but maybe breathing exercises works much better, or journaling, or going on a walk. So there are different techniques. And part of what can be helpful with continuous data, so not just the CGM, but something like, even a fitness tracker or an Oura ring, all of these continuous data streams, is that you can iterate really quickly. You can try something, see how your body responds to it, reflect on if it feels like it's something that you think you could be consistent with, something that works in your routine, and then find something that does work much quicker than maybe the older, old fashioned, like tried and true. Try this for a while. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's not. Try that. It just takes a lot longer to find the habits that are working for you.
I do want to talk about literally the continual glucose monitor on the aspect of accountability. I'm pretty enamored, Kara. I have been for years now, with the benefits of just wearing something, even if it's just for yourself, that the moment that you put on a Fitbit or an Oura ring or a Garmin watch or a CGM, that all of a sudden it's that immediate, I'm being tracked here. That alone, I love. I figure if everybody just did that, knowing that they were tracking things, we would by proxy make 5%, 10% better health decisions just for that. So I love it for that. Even more so if somebody's going to see it, which now with you guys, I mean, because there's other competitors out there where you can go get a continual glucose monitor. You guys then have coaching along with that. So again, before we get into that, even just that, if I know that, oh my gosh, I'm using this thing, somebody's watching and I'm about to eat a donut, man, I got to fess up to this, or they're going to, at least, even if I don't, they're going to see the response. I love the accountability of that. I'm an advocate of wearable devices just for that. Even if you don't show it with anybody, or if you decide, hey, me and my spouse, significant other, my buddy, we're going to share this stuff just to kind of keep us going, is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And going back to kind of pre CGM days, working with patients and counseling them, one of the most frustrating things is that you can educate people and you can tell them, what might be best for them. You can work together, but if they don't do it, then you don't see any results.
Yeah.
And so the switch between working with people with data, without data, to then working with people with data is night and day. The amount of accountability that people experience, the increase in just motivation when you actually see that this is working. So when somebody tells you something, your physician tells you you need to go do XYZ, or you read something on a blog, there's a different level of motivation that comes from those type of behaviors when you see that it actually works for you. So any sort of tracker that gives you that real feedback, but then also holds you accountable. We are an instant gratification species. We love that immediate feedback. That's why social media is so addicting for people. And so our health habits typically don't have very great immediate gratification. Sometimes it's even negative, right? So going to the gym for the first time in a while and you're sore, it's not immediate gratification. Eating a piece of cake at night actually just tastes good. It feels good. There's no negative consequence right away. So when we can really bridge that gap, that time gap with data, So now I eat that piece of cake. I see this huge glucose response. I know my coach is going to message me about it. And I know now it affected my sleep. And now my glucose values are higher the next day too. Suddenly it doesn't taste so good. Mm-hmm. So anything that really can, drive those sticky habits is also something I'm pretty obsessed with as well. So we see it's just night and day with having that data and actually being able to do the things you want to do.
Well, and I do want to say that if somebody hears that and that sounds harsh too, I mean, you're still the boss. If you want to have a piece of cake, have a piece of cake, watch your glucose and tell your coach, yeah, so I did it. You sue me. I mean, this isn't a hand slap thing. It's just hey, here's an offering to help understand that. And even that to be more intentional with what you do. Cause there is, I mean, this last weekend we had, kind of family celebration. I bought ice cream and I knew that we're going to watch the movie. I'm eating ice cream. My sleep will suffer for it. I chose that. And then I can choose also to try to recover better the next day and not do it the next night and whatever and deal with that and go to intentionality and at least knowing what's on there. Okay. Now with you guys, I mean, you provide a continual glucose monitor that folks, you put it on your arm. It's a little needle. You can go again to the Instagram account, Nutrisenseio there, and you see a lot of people, you guys have ads of putting it on because even that can bother some people. Oh gosh, it's a little needle. It's the most insignificant little needle. And you hardly feel it, if at all, going in. And then it just stays there. You got a little patch that goes over it and it is monitoring you. You got an app on your phone that you can then watch it. If you're like me, I'm not a tech person. I'm kind of paying attention to it, but I really don't even want to. I want to come and say, okay, Kara, team, whatever, let me know what's going on. And you provide coaching with that. And my understanding is that is kind of what makes you, or one of the things at least that makes Nutrisense, makes you guys unique. Again, not the point isn't to pitch Nutrisense, it's pitch the technology and the opportunity, but you do provide coaching with it. I'm not aware that that's a part of other competitors.
Yeah, we're the only company that's combining the human element with it. And of course I have a bias coming into this that I was a dietitian and I really believe in that human component. But I think when you combine data plus humans, that's when you see the best outcomes and the best experience for a customer. And so data alone, you might be taking away the wrong insights. You may not know what to do with it. Humans alone, it's not as motivating. It's not as powerful. But when we combine the two, that's where we really see that, something special happen.
I'm going to ask about the timeline of it. So I've got a buddy who's one of the big investors in Oura Ring. So he knows about it. We were talking and he says, yeah, he's just, talking, just ad-libbing about it. And he said, yeah, honestly, you get the Oura Ring. I think it's, $250, $300 last time I saw. You get that and it tells you what's happening with your sleep. I don't know, at least back when I looked at it, that it goes into a whole lot of depth. I mean, it probably provides some ideas, but it's mainly just monitoring your sleep. You make your adjustments and try to see better results. But he said, man, honestly, wearing the thing for like a month is pretty great. You kind of figure things out. If you don't want to wear it past then, you get a great benefit from wearing for a month. Now here, I see the benefit, like you and I talked about, I've got a wearable device. I wear it all the time. I look at the stats and I look at the trends almost every day because I want to know where I am because I do care about my performance, whether it's a run or it's, writing a show or whatnot there. So I see the benefit of using the CGM all the time. If somebody looked at it, because it costs, there's a decent cost to it too. Could you say that, look, at the least do it for X amount of time and figure out yourself so that you know what you're responding to. So even if you don't wear it for the rest of your life, give it this much time, get some coaching on it. What would that be? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, for most people, I really recommend doing at least 3 months. Okay. I think 3 months is a great amount of time to do your normal routine and then also experiment a little and get in kind of a good groove where you're in the right direction that you want to be. If you're super healthy, super knowledgeable, 1 month might be enough time because you might already have most things dialed in and you're just doing a small amount of adjusting. Whereas the other extreme, let's say you are pre-diabetic and overweight and you haven't changed much about your health or lifestyle, you might want to gear more towards 6 months or longer. And then there's that, initial behavior change, knowledge gathering stage. So that's that 1 to 6 months is really learning as much as possible. And then it's about kind of executing that behavior change side of things. And for some people, you don't need to wear the CGM to get that benefit. For some people, you learned the information and that is motivating enough to know, even without the sensor on, I know when I eat that thing at this time of day in this situation, it's not good. So again, you're making that intentional decision. Like you said, sometimes it's worth it and that's totally fine, but sometimes it's not worth it. So you get to make those trade-offs. Whereas with other people, we have some customers who have been using it continually since we launched over 4 years ago. So they have not taken it off pretty much since then. And those are the people where they're like, the data holds me accountable and that's more important to me. And so I'm not going without it. So I think it really depends on your personality for that part.
Okay. Well, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. And just learning those specific trends. I mean, at the core level, I don't know, we're talking non-diabetic for the most part here. I mean, that's where you guys, obviously, if you're diabetic, it's a huge benefit. But I feel like for me, the biggest calling card is my energy levels. I mean, is that the primary for your demographic of people? It's saying if you want to understand and monitor and then mitigate your energy levels or lack thereof, this is really, I don't know if there's a better opportunity available to us. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I obviously am a huge proponent of the devices and find them to be quite powerful and life-changing. I think energy levels is one of the biggest things people are looking for. Everybody wants to have better energy. Everybody wants to feel better throughout the day. And then I think a lot of people are also really motivated to not get a certain condition. Yeah. So let's say, your mother died of diabetic complications. You might have a very acute, awareness and motivation to not end up in the same situation. So there's also a lot of people we see who just really don't want to be taking that same path. But that's, similar prevention, feeling your best, doing everything you can to kind of arm yourself with as many tools in the toolbox to live that kind of life you want to live.
Well, folks, you can go, they call it a truth meter. I like that. You guys referring to it as.
That was from a customer said that, and I was like obsessed with that phrase.
I saw that and I thought it was good. Well, let me give folks a couple of resources. And friends, everybody, thank you as always for joining us on this journey as we all are seeking to elevate our own experience and improve the way that we show up for others. You can find Kara specifically on Instagram at Kara, Kara, Collier, Collier 1. Kara Collier. So you can follow her. She's talking about this stuff and her own journey within it. Now, the company is at Nutrisense.io. You can find them on Nutrisense.io is the website, but Nutrisense.io. And I would encourage you to go there even as you look at this, because you see a lot of people excited about the accountability, excited about what they're seeing, the results of seeing, gosh, this is how I'm responding. No wonder. And it helps make sense. So, Kara, I appreciate what you guys are doing and thanks for being here. And I'm just, it's something that I want to continue learning about it because I don't know if there's anything. I want to be concerned about the big ticket things and manifestations here. Today, selfishly, I just want good energy. So thanks for what you're doing and thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun.
Well, folks, if you appreciate the podcast and want to share it with others, rate the show on Spotify, leave a rating and review on Apple. You can subscribe to YouTube and see the whole show with Kara and myself and all the other ones. And then follow us, kevinmiller.co on social media. And if you want to learn how to master your own inner drive, my book, What Drives You, you can find on Amazon in any form. Until next time, stay driven.